Hi guys, today is a video I've wanted to make for a long time. I know I say that all the time, but this is one I've actually been working on for a while now. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been learning all I can learn about arcades, and so I thought now would be a very good time to put together a beginner's guide to arcades. Let's say you're curious about jumping into the arcade scene but have no idea where to start. Hopefully this video will give you guys a little insight on, where to begin. So let's start at the beginning. First things first, do you want to collect cabinets or do you want to collect PCBs or boards or just the games themselves? You've got those two options and you have to weigh those options. So first off, what is an arcade cabinet? Well, essentially an arcade cabinet is basically a PC with a input-output device attached to it. So basically you get a screen and you get some sort of a controller or some sort of apparatus in order to make things move on the screen. It's really that simple. Most of the games inside arcades are going to be PCBs, which are basically like a motherboard. Okay, it's going to be a self-contained unit. I happen to have one right here. Okay, this is a typical PCB. This is what you would find in an arcade game. This particular one is the 4-player X-Men arcade game from the 80s. I think it was the 80s anyways. Maybe it was the early 90s. Anyways, whatever the case may be. So this is typically what is inside a large arcade cabinet. Nothing fancy, right? Just this. Notice the little feet right here? Well, the idea with that is you would just take this, drill this down into a piece of wood in the inside of the arcade cabinet, and you're done. Literally, that's it. The rest of the arcade would be the monitor and typically your joysticks. But keep in mind that there are a lot of other input devices. You've got things like fishing rods, you've got things like light guns, you've got sometimes a motorcycle and things like that. So if you want to go for the arcade cabinet itself, you're really going to have to look around your house and realize, like, okay, do I have the space for a particular game I want? Another thing is that you'll be learning as we go along is that there are many different styles of these PCBs, okay? So, for example, if you have a Pac-Man game, you can't transform a Pac-Man game into a Street Fighter II arcade cabinet, for example. However, you could transform the Street Fighter II arcade cabinet to play Pac-Man. And I'm going to show you all these things as we go along. But to begin with, I don't even own an arcade cabinet here because, quite frankly, if I look around, I don't have the space for an arcade cabinet. So the route I personally have gone is to collect the PCBs or the games themselves and attach them to a SuperGun so I can play them on the big screen TV. I'm not suggesting you do the same. You can do whatever you want to do. But the thing is, for the purposes of this video, just realize that there are two different ways of getting into the arcade scene, and neither one of them is a worse option. It all depends on you. I mean, I'm sure many of you, like me, would love to have just rows of these classic arcade games, but that's just not an option for most of us. Okay, so now you've decided whether or not you're going to go the arcade cabinet route or if you're going to go the PCB route. It won't really matter too much as long as you pay attention to all the different topics that I'm about to cover, because a lot of these things you can up-convert. Basically, like, you can take a really old Pac-Man game, Galaga, stuff like that, and get those PCBs working in a newer arcade. I'm going to explain how that's possible. But you can't, very frequently, you can't downgrade. So, like I said, you can't play Street Fighter II on a Pac-Man arcade machine. It doesn't even have buttons. It just has the joystick. So how would you pull off any moves, right? Okay, so we're going to start now with explaining this right, if I can do this without hurting myself, right here. Notice what that says. See what it says? It says JAMA. JAMA, the name has actually changed a number of years ago. I believe I wrote it down. It's Japan Amusement Machine Manufacturers Association. And what's the point of this? Well, the point of this is that years ago, Donkey Kong would have a completely different pinout, okay? Let me show you one. Okay, this might look similar, right? This pinout to the one I just showed you. However, it isn't. This is not a JAMA pinout. This board, well, these two boards actually, are what's called the Capcom Classic pinout, because this is the original Ghosts and Goblins arcade board. And so, okay, now what does that mean? Well, it means that there are various types of arcade board pinouts. So you're going to have to do a little bit of research. I'm not going to tell you every single one because there's literally dozens of them. But as of 1985, when the standard was released, the JAMA standard was released, it took about 5 years before pretty much every single arcade game went to the JAMA pinout that you see here. So there's good news. In order to get older games or games that didn't use JAMA to work in either a JAMA arcade cabinet or via SuperGun or whatever else, you can actually pick up for really good prices things like this. This is a Capcom Classic to JAMA converter, adapter, whatever. All you do is you take this end, plug the Ghosts and Goblins arcade board from here, and then bam, you can just take this and you can connect this to any JAMA arcade cabinet, any JAMA SuperGun, any JAMA anything. Okay? And there are pretty much adapters for just about every single older arcade pinout that is ever been created. So you can take, for example, like Pac-Man and, like I said, Galaga, Donkey Kong, whatever, and just buy a little converter like this, put it on, and then run it through any JAMA cabinet or SuperGun. Now, there are also a lot of different arcade systems. See, what I've just touched on now, hopefully you're following along here. The arcade boards themselves will have different pinouts, but the good news is, like I said, you can use these adapters in order to make them all JAMA compatible. However, there are actual dedicated arcade systems, stuff like the Neo Geo MVS, stuff like the Atomis Wave here, okay, which has its own dedicated game cartridges like this, right? But this itself is an arcade system. So as you can see, it's got feet on it, not feet, but it's got a place for where you would connect it, drill it into your arcade cabinet. But look carefully at this, and what do you see? Oh, well, look at that. That is a JAMA connector. You'll also notice over here you've got like VGA and you've got sound out, so you can connect it, you know, to different input methods. But most of these arcades will have JAMA connections like this because that was the standard. That's what like everybody did. And keep in mind, this was released in the 2000s, so this is not that, well, actually, yeah, it's getting up there now. So there's a lot of different systems like this, but almost all of them are JAMA compatible in some way or another. I actually don't know of any arcade systems that you'd actually need an adapter for, but I'm not a professional here. Let me just move things around and I'll show you another one. Here's another arcade system. This is Capcom's classic CPS2. I can't tell you how many amazing arcade games were released on this system. This giant board, this blue board you see at the top, is actually the game, and that's removed from the base here, and this base is the actual system itself. So as long as I buy games like blue from North America, I can play them all on this bottom board. I don't need the dual boards here. So the thing is, well, how do you connect these? Well, take a look at the front, right? What is that right there? That's right, it's a JAMA connection. So, like I said, it doesn't really matter which systems you buy, and it doesn't even matter what PCBs you buy, as long as you do a little bit of research to make sure that there's an available converter or adapter on the market, you're pretty much good to go. And from my experience so far, there's one for just about every vintage arcade game. And honestly, depending on which games you want to buy, it doesn't really even matter. Going back, if you're looking at it from a perspective of a cabinet, you always have to make sure that you have the necessary buttons. It's really that simple. So, for example, if you want to play CPS2 games, like all the fighters are 6-button fighters. So that leads into something else. Now, when you want to go, I'm going to actually show you what would be inside your arcade cabinet, if I can find it. Okay. So, different arcade manufacturers could potentially have different kick harnesses, okay? What's a kick harness? Well, a kick harness is basically what allows you to play this game with all 6 buttons instead of, say, just 3 or 4. Because the default was around that. It was around 3 or 4 different buttons most arcade games were using up to this point. Now, you'll notice that on the front here, you've got this slot. This slot here, that's for your JAMA, but then you needed an additional cable that would connect into here to activate the 6 buttons. Like to basically, that's why they called it kick. It's because technically these were the buttons that would be your low, medium, and high kick in fighting games. Okay, so you're gonna need something like this. This is the CPS2 and CPS3 kick harness. So this is the end that goes into the CPS2. And in this particular case, since I'm using a SuperGun, I've got this end that goes into my SuperGun. But for a cabinet, you would have this, but it would be wired already directly into the buttons on the arcade cabinet itself. So if you wanted to play, say, like an older game, you just would leave this out. You just leave this dongle just hanging around doing nothing. You get it? It's not that complicated, really. But there is something else. Let's go back to this board right here. This is the X-Men board. Now, there were a couple of versions of this. This is the 4-player board, but there was a 6-player board. Now, look carefully here. Okay, see these two? Those two are player 3 and player 4. They're not kick harnesses because you didn't require the extra buttons, but you did require basically a connection that would activate these additional 2 players. My Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles board is exactly the same. It's got the exact same type of thing. So for that, you're going to need another cable, right? So in this case, here it is. This is basically, these are the 2 things, player 3 and 4, and this would go into my SuperGun. But again, depending on the arcade cabinet you would have, you wouldn't necessarily have any, this would all be done for you. Basically, these 2 ports would just be hanging there. And if you bought a board that didn't support those players, you just obviously would just leave these hanging. Keep in mind, though, that if this is for Konami, if I need a Capcom one, okay, it's not exactly the same. This is a Capcom one. Okay, see how it's not exactly the same. So you do have to pay attention to like what's what, especially if you're looking for an arcade cabinet. That might complicate things, because if it's already been hardwired and you've got it like this, it's very possible there might be some sort of a converter that would allow you to take both of these and then convert it to say like the Capcom system or something. But I don't know. I'm looking at this from a SuperGun perspective, where I just bought, these are the Konami player 3 and 4, and then this is the Capcom player 3 and 4. So like that was good enough for me. But it's just, I just wanted to give you guys just a very quick look at how, like, things that you have to keep in mind. I know a lot of questions I've been getting was like, well, can I just swap out one board for another? Well, now hopefully you have a better idea that, yeah, you actually can, depending on what the arcade machine is or is capable of, Or if you're going the SuperGun route, which is this right here, this is the awesome one I got from Jamination X. It's a little easier, if you know what I mean, because you don't have to worry about button configurations. You don't have to worry about the arcade cabinet whatsoever. This is a JAMA. The JAMA, well, whatever connector right here. So I have a harness that goes from this to all the individual arcade boards. And like what I just showed you 4 different games. I showed you a CPS2 system, a Thomas Wave, the Capcom classic pinout for Ghosts and Goblins, and X-Men. All right, every single one of these plays on this because I have the adapter, right? So this JAMA I can just connect to the harness and away I go. I've already explained the perks of a SuperGun in the previous video. This was where you would connect in your multiplayer, so players 3 and 4, and then this is your kick harness that you need to activate the 6 buttons on the joysticks. Okay, so I've already gone over the SuperGun. I think you guys have an idea, I hope now, of how you go about like collecting for these different systems and boards and whatnot. There's something else that's very important to mention with boards and sometimes with systems as well. For example, if you look really carefully right there, you'll see it says, I think it says switch, right? Well, SW. Okay? Why is that important? Well, a lot of systems, arcade systems, and individual games will have dip switches. What is a dip switch? Well, I'm going to show you, give you a good idea here what a dip switch is. You see that? Look carefully at that. Okay? You should be able to see that they say on and there's a bunch of numbers. Well, those correspond to certain features. Sometimes it will be like if you turn switch 1, 2, and 3 on, it's 1 coin for 1 life. Sometimes, you know, you can tweak things like that. Other times it'll be stuff like blood. Blood will be on, blood will be off. There's just a whole bunch of different options that are usually associated with dip switches, particularly with older games. A lot of the newer games will have, I don't think you'll be able to see this, so I'm just going to say it. There's 3 switches here. One is volume up and down, and one is test. Some systems have a test switch like this. So you just press the test switch, and then you go into the software options where you can customize like your coin options, stuff like blood on and off, things like that. So it's important to note that. Now, that's going to basically make you go, whoa, wait a minute, where am I possibly going to find information? And that leads into the next segment of this video, which is useful resources for when you're just starting to collect arcade games, be it cabinets or be it just the PCBs or the individual systems and games. So, you've got dip switches, right? You have no idea what they do. Go to KLOV, that's K-L-O-V. Put that in Google. It's also known as the Arcade Museum. It is a phenomenal resource, not just in order for purchasing games or for frequently asked questions or for help via their message boards, but the actual site itself is just an amazing resource to find things like that. Like you'll put in, say, Ghosts and Goblins in their search, and you can go to their download section, and they'll actually have the original instruction manual that would have shipped with the PCB way back when. It tells you what all the dip switch settings are. Sometimes there'll be like a resource will tell you what year the particular game was released, what the actual cabinet looks like. That's very important for you guys that are into looking to collect arcade cabinets, because if you want to make sure you get the legitimate thing, not that someone has customized, or when I say customized, I mean like literally built from the ground up this particular machine, this hybrid machine. Maybe that is what you want, but if you are looking for the original authentic arcade cabinet, you want to make sure that you're actually purchasing the right thing. And that's something else I want to warn all of you about. With PCBs, individual games, there is piracy galore. You want to make sure you do your research. You want to do your homework here. And one of the ways you do that is by going to a site like Clov or the Arcade Museum. You have to do this because you can get taken advantage of so easily. Just because they'll have stickers that say Capcom on them, you want to actually look at the PCB to make sure, okay, yeah, the circuits are where they're supposed to be. This is the legitimate thing. With games like this, it can be the same thing. Often I haven't seen too many of these get pirated. I'm sure they do. But especially with Neo Geo stuff, in Atomus Wave and stuff like that, there's a lot of counterfeit stuff out there, and you don't want to pay $200 for one particular game when it's a bootleg version that is only like 20 bucks. So, you do have to be careful of that. So, like I said, Clov or the Arcade Museum, it's the same exact sites, just one leads you mainly to the message boards, and one is the actual main site. Another one that's been very useful to me is the Neo Geo message boards. Just put neo-geo.com and go to their message boards. They have a dedicated arcade central thread that's just phenomenal. They have great technical support. That's actually where I originally met James from Jamination X, and that would eventually lead me to purchasing a SuperGun. So think of that. Right? Like before, if it wasn't for that site, I never would have had any of this awesome stuff. Another one, obviously, is James' site, which is Jamination X. That's where you can get yourself a lovely little SuperGun. His customer service is spectacular. He does this full time now. And I mean, as you can see, this is a thing of beauty. This looks like I purchased this from some large-scale manufacturer or whatever, and yeah, I just can't say enough great things about James. And he will even go the mile. If you don't know how to solder or whatever, he's willing to take out and replace the batteries and stuff like this. He's willing to customize and make cables for you, kick harnesses, you name it. And James will help you out with it. And if he can't help you out with it, he'll point you in the right direction. And I think that, above all else, is what I love about the arcade community. Everyone is willing to help out. They want to keep the scene alive. So there's no such thing as a stupid question. Yeah, every once in a while you run into a jerk or whatever. But if you say that you're really a noob and you really want to learn how to to proceed, you don't know where to start. I've been shocked at just how amazing people have been and how helpful everyone has been and just how forthcoming everyone has been. It's been just incredible. One last site that I go to a lot is jamaboards.com, and that's where I purchase things like this. Adapters they sell batteries, because a lot of these arcade systems had batteries in order to save certain features. And the Capcom CPS system in particular, you have to change these batteries or the game dies. There are ways around it, and that's why I gave you the resources so that you can go to these particular sites in order to find out a little bit more about your particular board. The other thing is, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Part of the appeal and the fun of arcades is actually tinkering with them. For example, with this X-Men board, if you look right here, you'll see that this was all black. This looked like this. It had this paint on it or whatever. And as you can see, it's been removed. Well, why? It's because this board looks brand new. This looks like mint. There's no scratches. The traces are great. Everything is amazing with this, but it's got no audio. And this leads into the next part too, which is know what you're buying. Use those resources I've given you and know what you're buying. Don't just go out, oh, I want this game, and purchase the game and then that's it. Know what you're getting yourself into. For example, this is what controls the audio. These capacitors are surface mounted. That's extremely difficult if you don't have experience with soldering in order to remove these and resolder them on. I know people who watch this and be like, no, it's not a problem at all. But it's not really, it's not as simple as what you would be used to with a console, for example. If you're used to just putting a game in, now we're talking about soldering, we're talking about lots of research and what have you. And it's the truth. That is the truth. That's what you're getting into when you decide to take the arcade plunge. With a game like that, I did some research and I found out, okay, it's a very common problem with these old Konami boards where the audio, the capacitors blow, they leak their lovely little juice all over to the audio chip, and they can actually permanently damage the board. You'll have pristine graphics, but the audio will just never work again. And so that's why it's extremely important. You do your research, you find out about the games you want, if there are any problems, and then don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. A really good one, like a really good example, is with this. There are batteries in this, and you know that going in. If you do your research, you know that you could potentially buy this and it's dead because the battery, if it goes below a certain voltage, that's it. But a little soldering, a really quick solder job of just removing two little solder points, replacing the battery, soldering those 2 points back up, and you've got another 5 years of awesomeness. And if you do what I'm doing now, which is I don't even resolder on a battery, I solder on a battery holder and then just, flick it out like you would in, say, like a flashlight or something like that. So it's even easier. I only had to do the soldering once, and then I just buy the batteries every 5 years, plop them out, plop them back in, done. I mean, like, how much easier can you possibly get? But again, it all goes back to doing the research. So anyways, that I think is where I'm going to leave this video for right now. I know it's a long video, but I really hope I've answered a lot of your potential questions of just how do you begin? What are some of the things you have to look out for? Something else I didn't mention, but you can customize SuperGuns any way you want. I have this where it's only using RGB out via a I think this one's an 8-pin. I don't remember. Anyways, it's through an RGB SCART cable, and that's all I wanted. I wanted the purest original source, if you will, from the SuperGun. But if you don't want to deal with upscalers and you don't want to worry about any of that, you can customize these things to have composite. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could have, say, S-Video. You could have component. And maybe that is more worthwhile for you. It's easier, right? You have to keep in mind that when you go this route, you don't have joysticks. So you're going to have to purchase joysticks. And what I've seen very, very frequently is people will, when they make their SuperGuns, they will make them default to Neo Geo sticks. The other very popular thing is for them to go the Sega Saturn route, where they'll have the Sega Saturn inputs here. It doesn't matter which way you go about doing it. You can always buy arcade sticks. You don't need to go all fancy like with what I did. You can just go on eBay, pick up an original Neo Geo arcade stick, or if you go the Sega Saturn route, that's even easier. It's going to cost you nothing to pick up a Japanese Sega Saturn controller for just a couple of bucks. So don't worry so much about that. And the monitor that you're going to connect, like I said, if you use component or something like that, if you customize your SuperGun that way, that's really, really easy. If you do go the cabinet route, there are a lot of other things you're going to have to watch out for. You're going to have to pay attention to power supplies. I didn't mention that, but all of these boards are all basically running on 5 volts. However, if you're going to run, say, a 4-slot MVS, that's going to require a little more juice. So it depends on what power supply you have, not only in your SuperGun, but in your arcade cabinet. So these are other things you're going to have to pay attention to. As a standard rule, see, I didn't know this, but James from Jamination basically told me it's 5 volts, which is great because this guy, he's compatible. I asked him to make it so that I can play anything on here. And with this little knob, I can increase the voltage. So it's perfect. This is absolutely perfect for me. But if I had an arcade cabinet, that might complicate things a little bit. I'd have to pay attention more to what the voltage was. The other thing with the arcade cabinet is the actual monitor itself. You have to make sure that it's in good working order. You also have to keep in mind that it's going to be an old CRT type monitor, so you just want to make sure that it still works. So if you guys have any questions whatsoever about any of this, I will do my very best to help you out. And I hope that this gave you a little bit of an insight into how to begin collecting for arcades. It's really not that complicated. It's just you have to sit back and be like, okay, you know, it's not a console I'm dealing with here. There's like a multitude of different systems, of different games, different pinouts, different connections, but it's not overwhelming. If you just stand back and be like, okay, you know, I got this. I'm sure you could get on get in the arcade scene with little to no problems. And like I said, the arcade community is incredible. Those resources I gave you are like the best of the best. And don't forget, I'm here too. I'm learning just as many of you probably who are watching this. So if you have any questions whatsoever, I will do my absolute best to help you out. I really hope some of you learned something here today, or at least that you found it a little bit entertaining or educational. And as always, thank you very much for watching and supporting, and well, welcome to the arcade community.